Yeah, well, speaking from Noosa, unfortunately, it's overcast, which is most disappointing.
On the other hand, it is Noosa, so the occasional day that's overcast.
I'm sure you can feel the empathy just wafting.
Yeah, that's right. We're very sympathetic. I've started reading your book, Paul.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
I won't ask what you think of it in front of all the audience.
Well, so far, great.
Oh, good. Just hold it up a bit longer, and it's available on Booktopia, Amazon, and
You sorted out
all
the
resellers.
You sorted out the bookshop, the online stores.
Yeah,
There's a bit of a glitch.
Yeah, I think it's available on Amazon. I think it dropped off Booktopia for some reason.
Yeah.
So I hope you find it useful, Jeff.
Yes, so far so good.
Or at least entertaining.
Yeah, that's right. If the conclusion is I never should have got into small business, I'll let you know.
Well, about a third of the book is dedicated to a completely made up test on are you the entrepreneurial type, almost to dissuade people that aren't from wasting 2 years of their life and half their mortgage on starting a business.
Yeah, and that's probably best case outcome.
Yeah. A lot of people do it, as we've seen.
So that said, welcome everybody to the Melbourne Angels at Noon. We really appreciate you all coming along. I just wanted to give you a little bit of information about Melbourne Angels before we get on with the day's proceedings. First of all, I have to acknowledge the organisations who support Melbourne Angels, because without them, we wouldn't be able to do the things that we do. And what is it that we do? Well, we have been consistently for nearly 15 years one of the most active startup investors in the country. We do typically do a significant number of investments every single year. And that averages out certainly in the last many years to about $3 million a year of our money invested. We have nearly 100 members who are actively involved in the group, and we have a portfolio in excess of 75 companies that we've invested in, of whom 10 have passed through an exit activity. As I said, we've been going for nearly 15 years. One of the things that we do, one of the reasons that we do what we do is because we actually are trying to make a significant contribution to the community and to the economy, not just looking for a financial return for our money, but actually trying to make our community a better place. So one of the measures we are very happy about is that we have funded in excess of 600 new jobs through the companies that we've invested in. And as you can see, it's not just the money that we invest, but we actually have attracted significant additional investment into the companies that we've invested in. So I have to keep admitting people the waiting room. So that's just a little bit of a guide as to the impact that we've had. So in one way, you could say that we've been something like a $200 million venture capital fund, although I'd like to think we've actually had a much bigger impact than most funds would have. So why angel investors, and why do we do it in Melbourne? Well, it's worth recognising that just under 60% of Australia's unicorns have been backed by angels at the beginning, and just over 60% have been founded here in Melbourne. So those are some pretty significant reasons about why we do it in Melbourne. And in terms of why we do it at all, if you consider the exits, the returns that are generated by companies, by startup style companies in the last few years, you can see that the vast majority of them, in the order of 70%, did start out as angel-backed companies. Just under half of all of those were here in Melbourne. And the vast majority of them did that with no venture capital investment. And as a result, produced very good returns for the founders and for the angels. And it's important to understand that when we talk about angel investing, the only way that we do well is if the founders are doing super well. And that's very much the model and alignment that we focus on. So what does that look like for Melbourne Angels? Well, this is just an attempt to show you some of the many companies that we're invested in. On the left, you can see some of the exits, well, in fact, all of the exits. If I managed to get it right, there should be 10 there. On the right, you can see some of the companies in our portfolio who are doing very well right now. So these are companies that are already valued at 30 or 40 times the value at which we invested and are continuing to grow. And then in the middle block, you can see some of the many companies in the portfolio who are actually growing and building momentum towards success for their ventures. So we would encourage you or anybody that you know who you think might be interested to consider joining us as a member of Melbourne Angels. As I said, we focus on getting a significant return on our involvement in the community. And we do that as a collective and collaborative group. And we have been recognised by the Australian Angel community with a series of awards that you can see at the bottom of the slide. But the awards are just an acknowledgement of the work of all of our members and the significant contribution of time and effort that they put into helping startup companies exist, yet alone grow and succeed. So that said, I just want to make a quick introduction of our guest speaker today, Emilie Sydney-Smith, who is the CEO of ExO Works. And if you're wondering about ExO, it refers to the idea of an exponential organization, the idea of extreme growth that every company is seeking in today's world, as the pace of change and the pace of adaptation required by organizations continues to accelerate. And today, Emilie is going to help us understand how the very biggest companies are, or rather how the fastest growing companies, what are the characteristics that make the fastest growing companies work, and what can we do as investors or as founders to understand and spot those characteristics in the companies that we're seeking to build or we're seeking to invest in. So just before I introduce Emilie, I just want to say thank you again for turning up today. We really appreciate you all coming along. Of course, we do this every month, last Friday of every month. In the not too distant future, we're hoping to get back to making it a lunch in person. But at the moment, the capacity limitations on getting people into a room make this still a more useful way to include more people in this activity. So the next event will be on May 28th. If you're on the mailing list, you'll be getting the invitation. If you're not and you'd like to join the mailing list, you can do that through our website at melbourneangels.com. And thank you again for today. I'll hand it over to Emilie now, and she'll make her talk, and then we'll go into Q&A. When we do go into Q&A, I'd appreciate it if you could raise your hand either physically or using the raised hand feature in Zoom, so we can try and make sure we see who wants to ask a question and give everybody a chance to get their question answered. So let me stop sharing my screen and hand it over to you, Emilie.
Thanks, Jordan. Wonderful to see you all here. If I can leave one impression today, it's that I really hope that Australia will start to think much bigger. We really have a once-in-the-lifetime opportunity right now. And if we think bigger, we can actually do some pretty extraordinary things. And we're very excited to be working with Jordan on one of the projects I'm going to talk about a little. So I run a company that was started about 6 years ago when the founder actually looked around the world. He was running Singularity University at the time and said, wow, it's absolutely crazy that no one seems to be looking at this whole new business model that's coming out. There's these fastest growing companies in the world, and why aren't we looking at what is actually underlying those companies? Because it seems to be something completely new that we've never seen before. So when he did this research, he actually found that there are 11 attributes that are shared between those companies. And I'm going to come back to those, but what we're finding is that if we can bring those ideas, those attributes into any kind of company, any kind of government organization, any organization at all, they can really start to grow very easily. And the real trick of all of these attributes is that they actually co-design all of the products and services with their stakeholders and customers, and they set it up in a way that there's a flywheel. And so the customers and the suppliers actually benefit from helping the company to grow. They're doing a whole lot of the work for the company. And so we looked around the world at what was going on and saying, you know, why is it that there are so many of these large companies that are just failing over and over again at their innovation? And so that's why the work that I'm doing is very focused there. But if we look around, so if you look at different studies, between 72 and 96% of corporate innovation is failing, which means that $3.5 trillion has been wasted over the last decade, at the same time that big tech that grew out of startups in that time actually created $7 trillion worth of value, all in US dollars that. And so we said, okay, well, clearly those companies are trying to do it the hard way. They're just all copycatting each other and not sort of stepping back and saying, there's this entirely new model that is working and we can do something about it. And so we have been working with very large companies, Visa, HP, Procter Gamble, BHP, Rio Tinto, Bristol Myers Squibb, these large companies, and actually bringing in these 11 attributes and helping them to grow. And what we've found is that we can actually, over a 10-week period, design 8 different initiatives, which each have a similar sort of focus. And so typically we can find something where they can spend under $10 million over 2 years and then be spinning off at least $100 million of value per annum from that initiative, from that very low spend. So, you know, huge returns on investment. And so I want to also bring in that theme, which is everything has to have a 10x result. We see so many companies going after something that's only 10% improvements, these incremental improvements, and where they're saying, okay, well, there is an existing product or service that fits a way to solve a problem, and we're going to try and have something that's a little bit better in that highly commodified market. Instead of saying, there's a customer problem, is there a way that we can solve that tenfold better? And maybe it's not with the way that we currently think about that product or service. Maybe it's something completely new. And when companies come at that problem solving from that point of view, then they start to come up with things that they're not just going back into the same commodified industries. They're actually finding something that they can step out into a whole new realm and grow very quickly because there's a real market demand sitting around it. And so the billions of dollars that we've made for our clients, yes, they're large companies that have scale, but they're actually building startups on the edge of their organizations. Those billions of dollars have come through that kind of thinking. So that real 10x thinking. And then the third element that I want to add into it out of 4 is that we really need to think about the technologies that are all around us. So we've identified about 15 technologies that are all on an exponential curve. An exponential curve in that their prices are coming down exponentially and the quality and readiness for market is going up exponentially, as is the demand. And so we find that a lot of companies are not thinking about those technologies. They're certainly not mapping out the fact that they are exponential. They're thinking about them in a very linear way and then getting blindsided when suddenly that technology is ready and cheap enough to actually disrupt them, instead of actually finding a way to actually make use of that technology. And then the 4th strand of work that we're really focused on is purpose. If you look at those fastest growing companies in the world, they all have at their core what we call a massive transformative purpose. It's their guiding light. It's the thing that when they're really struggling to make a decision, they say, does it meet my massive transformative purpose or not? And when you actually bring that into a company, there's both a real reason to actually attract both staff, but also loyal supporters who will help you build your company. But there's also a way of really making a lot of money out of that. So just to give you a couple of examples, as you know, we work with large corporates. So even though I know you're smaller companies, just to give you some examples, we worked with one of the largest polluters in the world recently that really wanted to work out how to solve that. And they're already making a $2 billion investment into renewables. But when we looked at the first pilot projects that they're doing, we realized that their emissions actually went up. And once we actually really researched why that was, it turned out that they were not comfortable taking the reserve, the spinning reserve, offline. So basically they had diesel that was still working, and then they were just adding the renewables on top because it's intermittent. And so we said, well, why? Why are you not prepared to do that? Well, they didn't really trust that demand and supply was going to be met. So we worked with a whole lot of different potential suppliers and found that, in fact, over their entire global footprint, they could spend just $6 million more on top of that $2 billion investment to really understand supply and demand so much that they could actually take 60% of their spinning reserve offline. Now that's 12% of emissions, but it's also $300 million per annum in fuel savings. And so when you make that $6 million investment to get that kind of return, then, you know, when we presented this to leadership, to the CEO and Chief Strategy Officer, they actually said, we can't actually give you an answer right now. We are so shocked. We've never seen anything like this. We're shaking. We need some time to just, you know, regroup, because they're not used to seeing this kind of thing. And so over and over, if we, you know, go down this path of finding things that are 10x, utilizing these technologies and utilizing this new business model, we find some really extraordinary things. So I'm going to share with you just a couple of slides that show you specifically what I'm talking about. And just checking that you can see my screen there.
Yep.
Great. Okay, so these are those 11 attributes that I'm talking about. So first of all, basically all of those companies have this massive transformative purpose. And if the companies that you're building or that you're working with don't, it's the most urgent thing that you could be trying to develop with them. But then we have on the left here, the things that really bring abundance to what you're doing. So this is, if you think about it, more the external kind of areas. So that's staff on demand, you know, getting people to do the work for you, which of course is what happens with Ubers and, you know, crowd and community. It's getting those people to do that work. The algorithms, of course, and usually we're finding that companies have this spaghetti ball of different software systems that don't work well together. And so we're doing a lot to sort of unscramble that. Then leveraged assets, again, you know, Airbnb, Uber are great examples of using someone else's assets. Engagement is really around crowdsourcing, but also a lot of gamification. So how do you get people really excited to come and work alongside you and bring you their ideas? Now, if you look at the gamification model, for instance, offering a prize to someone, what we see is that on average, people will actually spend 17 times the prize pool to actually win that prize. And so it can be an incredibly valuable way of getting research done. Now, if we move to the other side, the ideas. So this is really about managing internally how you've brought that abundance to you. So first of all, you want those digital interfaces with your suppliers, your customers, any of your stakeholders that really make things easy. You want those dashboards internally so that you can really understand what's happening across the organization. And when I said there are problems with these spaghetti balls of algorithms, often that dashboard is actually what gives us visibility into what's really going on and the insights that are needed. Experimentation is so important. And of course, as entrepreneurs, you've probably all very familiar with the lean startup kind of model. And of course, experimentation is very key to that. Autonomy is really important, not just this command and control kind of idea that is frankly too slow in the way that the markets are moving. We need to be getting information very quickly. What we're finding is that autonomy won't happen in an organization of any scale without having a dashboard where the senior management can actually really understand what's going on across the company and feel comfortable to give that autonomy. And then social technologies. So this is not social media. This is things that allow collaboration. So whether it's being on Google Docs together, where, you know, if it's Slack, if it's WhatsApp, but constantly being able to very quickly communicate with others. Now, I want to share with you two examples while we're looking at this slide. Now, the best example that we've ever seen of an organisation actually implementing these ideas at scale and very fast has actually been the Australian government's COVID response. So we always say if a government under that kind of pressure so quickly can actually do it, then any organisation on earth can. And so basically what they did was they said, right, well, we're going to understand that there are all these fantastic groups out in the community that do wonderful work around viruses. And so we're going to leave this autonomy with them, but we're going to actually have them bring information in real time through those interfaces to us, so that we can then make real-time decisions and get that out to the community. And we're going to ask the community to come along with us on this journey. The COVID Safe Act, now I know that there's been a lot of controversy around that, but that was also a part of enabling the community. Now, to get something developed so quickly and to have such a huge uptake so quickly was pretty amazing. And that also really leveraged external assets to do that, and a staff on demand way of bringing that together. And so they really did so much, including that experimentation and that autonomy, to make it work. And of course, we see the huge benefits that that had. Now, a second company that I want to talk about that was an amazing startup, you may not have heard of Peloton, but in the US, it's become a $17 billion company after a decade. And they really utilized this idea. So Peloton is exercise equipment. They started out as exercise bikes, and we often hear people say, well, it has to be a digital idea to actually get any traction if we're going to do these things at scale. Well, Peloton is a great example that that's not the case. So usually exercise bikes are really boring, but they said, well, what about if we started to think differently? So they started experimenting with a whole lot of sales channels. And what they did was they also said, let's make it really exciting. So we'll actually have real-time instructors actually doing really cool, very engaging kind of exercise classes. And we'll also have it so that people can interact. So they have this fantastic dashboard that gives them all the information about what they're doing, but also this interface to be able to talk with all of their peers. There's engagement in that they're actually trying to win prizes against each other, setting milestones against each other. And so that community and crowd has come together, and they've now got about 1.5 million users who are so powerful as a crowd saying that they love Peloton, that Peloton basically has never had to have a marketing budget, because people will actually post photos of themselves on Instagram loving their Peloton. They've got almost 100% customer retention rate year over year. And so that experimentation that they did, they originally went the very obvious route. They had some sales showrooms. Then they started to organize a joint venture with Marriott, put those exercise bikes around, but that was very slow. And then they started to realize, hey, we should tap back into these kinds of ideas and think about what else is out there. And the thing that really made them take off was thinking about leveraged assets. So lots of people have an exercise bike at home. They might have had that New Year's resolution that might be sitting gathering dust in their garage, but they might have that, and they probably have a computer or some sort of access, a tablet or something that they can use. And so instead of buying a $2,000 to $5,000 US bike, you can use what you've already got at home and just have a subscription. And so suddenly, once they offered that, they went up to about 1 million subscriptions in a very short amount of time. So they had about $1 billion worth of investment over the first 5 years. They're now worth 17 billion. So just an extraordinary success story, because they actually looked at how to implement these ideas. Now, another idea, if you want to actually test whether any of the companies that you're working with starting up or that you're thinking about investing into, I highly recommend that you actually run the company through this survey, which will test all 11 of those attributes and give you a score. Now, you'll get an email with that answer. So you can do it anytime. We also find a lot of companies doing it regularly to see whether they've actually upgraded themselves. We will be making a big announcement in a couple of weeks. We looked at the Fortune 100 about 5 years ago in the US and their EXQ scores, and we've just run them again. And I can tell you that the top scoring companies earlier on have done multiples better than the companies that had a low score on this. And you wouldn't necessarily expect which those ones would have been from their strength back 10 years ago. Now, I mentioned these 15 technologies that are all going mainstream. We think that they will be ubiquitous part of our everyday lives within a couple of years. And basically COVID has pushed almost all of these along very quickly. And so we're working actively bringing these technologies into companies on every single one of these technologies. So feel free to ask me about any of them in the Q&A. But we see so many countries and companies forgetting to look at these. There's often just an idea that, well, we'll think about the third industrial revolution, which is that digitalization, which is so important. We absolutely must do it. But if we're not going to think about these fourth industrial revolution ideas as well, well, what a pity that would be. And so, as I said, these are on these doubling patterns. It's just extraordinary. Yes, computing power is on that Moore's law. If you just think out, 8 years, what does that mean for the world? 21 times the computing power. That's pretty exciting. But if you look at these others that are actually growing even faster, what can we build around these other things? Medical knowledge being 362 billion times more in 8 years. This is exciting. And so I want to say, this is an amazing time for Australia. We have done so incredibly well during this COVID time. We've also had 50% of expat Australians come back to Australia and build up. Australia's always had this strength, but there's been this brain gain as well. There's a time, when the rest of the world is so unstable and there's this island of stability here in Australia. We can think bigger. And so therefore, Jordan has been joining us on a project, which is to say, why don't we actually think bigger? Instead of just trying to win more market share in existing, highly commodified, highly competitive industries, why don't we create a new one for Australia, where Australia is the dominant player and remains that way? And so we're going through a process of facilitating bringing the right people together for this, being large companies, small companies, and all the other different areas, and trying to define what that industry should be. I hope some of you will join us on that process. But as I say, if we can think big, if we can think 10x and bring in these new business models and technologies, then I think Australia is in an extraordinary place. Thank you, and back over to you, Jordan.
Thank you very much, Emily. I think that was great. And I've just put in the chat for people. I just did a quick bit of research, and it looks like Peloton actually started with a $400,000 angel round back in February 2012.
Right.
So once again, why angel investing? Because it can work. Anyway, more importantly, people who have questions for Emily about anything that she's spoken about. So I haven't done the survey, but the questions in the survey are the sorts of things that can be answered for a startup company, or do they require real data or statistics, which startup companies don't have?
Absolutely, they can be done for a startup, and we've actually seen a number of companies do them as a startup and then every year, and In fact, we just met with a company that had doubled in size once they actually got up to a certain level of EXQ score. They could see themselves doubling every year. So it can be really exciting.
Very good. Other people? Come on, surely you've got a question. Peter.
Hi, Emilie, thanks very much for your presentation. Very interesting. I wonder if you might be able to go back to that slide of the 15 disruptive technologies. And I actually didn't get time to read them all, but I've got questions about 2 of them. The first is the emotion. The one before where you showed all the different types, the 15 different types. That one, yeah. So, so 2 questions. Would you be able to speak a bit about the emotion sensing AI? I'm not very familiar with that. That's number 1. And quantum computing, I'm aware of one startup which is trying to develop a handheld quantum computer within 5 years and radically change the application of computing to everything. So perhaps you might be able to comment in your understanding, where is the development of quantum computing up to?
Great. Okay, wonderful. So emotion sensing AI is really computing that watches facial expressions and can tell what the emotion is. And it actually, there are some great examples that are actually, you know, from quite a while ago, but Affectiva is one of the companies that's really leading in this area. And they're doing things like watching drivers to work out whether they're about to fall asleep. But we're also seeing a lot of deployment. People don't realize that their cameras are actually watching them when they're looking at shopping sites to actually see what they're really interested in. And, you know, you might suddenly get a discount offer for something that you looked interested in, which is coming from that. We're also seeing some really exciting ideas. So there's a program called Ellie, E-L-L-I-E, which is a psychologist, a digital psychologist that was developed to help identify returned veterans who are at risk of suicide, because a lot of those veterans will not talk or don't want to talk openly with someone, but they're willing to talk to a computer because they don't feel like they're being judged. And so the emotion sensing was actually able to pick up twice the number of people who really needed help. So really exciting area. Some real risks around how it could be used, but exciting as well. Quantum computing, one of our coaches, one of the people who really work very closely with us, also works with Qubit, which is a Canadian company that's doing some extraordinary things in quantum computing. I think that geopolitically, it's incredibly important. Whichever country or company has the first true quantum computer that can crack a lot of codes will have such dominance that behind the scenes, there's, you know, a huge push to this. And if you really think about the, you know, questions over Taiwan, frankly, a lot of it is about the semiconductors, and it will be even more so now once we work out what will actually need to be the components that go into quantum computing. The ability to go through huge amounts of information very quickly is really important. However, we don't necessarily have the databases for that computing yet. Most of the skill sets that will go into quantum computing will be completely different from the ones that are used for current algorithms. It will generally be mathematicians who can deal with the probabilities, because a lot of it is you don't just get a specific answer, you get a lot of noise around the answer. But the ability to look at new medicines, there are now databases of millions of different molecules, the ability to actually quickly look at which molecules could go together to create new material science, or protein folding, or all of these things, or looking at space, or looking at climate, all these things that need huge amounts of computing will be absolutely revolutionized by quantum computing, but that it will also break probably 80% of current encryptions. So any company that is not looking at how they're going to protect themselves when that first true quantum computer comes online is really not thinking very smartly, because frankly, that day you don't know what you can trust. So do you trust your water supply? Do you trust your banking system? Do you get in a plane? And so you could actually see a Y2K moment that people are not planning for. Anyway, I could talk way too long about quantum computing. Did that answer some of your question?
Oh, yeah, no, that's fantastic. Just one quick follow on. What's the current forecast in years when quantum computing might be realized?
If you ask different people, they'll say different things. If you're asking my guess, I would say actually fairly shortly. I would say, you know, the 3 to 5 year time we'll have a true quantum computer. Other people are very skeptical about that and would say 20 years.
Excellent. Michael Muntisov.
Yeah, Emily, thank you very much. I totally agree with and support the idea of Australia thinking big. I think we're just so narrow in our thinking, and the potential in the country is just incredible. If we could just open our minds, as you're suggesting, we could just achieve amazing things. My question is about established companies, and you talk about the 10 times the exponential growth. Realistically, and maybe this is not something you've thought about, but realistically, are there some companies in which that is actually very difficult, or may not apply so well to them?
We have not found a company that it's not possible in. We've found ones where the culture won't support it. And so really, there are companies where the leadership just doesn't like ideas. So for instance, you might go in, we've been into companies where, they've got a very physical operation, and we've come, to them with a whole lot of ideas. There was one that wanted us to absolutely focus on something that's very future, and that's not cost effective yet. And we said, okay, well, it's not cost effective. And so therefore, within that topic, we're going to come back to you with a whole lot of things that could be extremely viable and lucrative right now on the way to it, that need to be put in place before it will be lucrative to do the other thing. And that, by the way, you could invest under $10 million in, rather than the usual billions of dollars worth of investment that you make on any of your projects. And they turned around and said, hang on, no, we're the physical company. We want to be making the billions of dollars of investment, and in 20 years time, we might have made that return. So that's when you go, okay, well, you're not really set up for this, are you?
Yeah. And so perhaps as a follow-on question, how do you rank, some of the ideas you're coming up with would be seen as incredibly radical, and they probably are in terms of current thinking. So would it be fair to say that some companies will fail if they did try and do this thing, they would fail? It's not like everyone who suddenly adopted this thing would succeed. Part of that could be the culture, but there would certainly be a risk of failure, would there not?
Well, failure is really important so long as companies are learning from it and doing lots of experiments. If you actually look at Amazon, they do a really interesting thing, which is that they have such amazing dashboards that are giving them so much information all the time, and they're running hundreds of experiments at a time, but they'll only actually make a big bet and really invest in 1 or 2 things a year, because the management has such visibility into every one of those experiments that they can narrow down and be very smart about them, knowing that the rest will fail. I think that there's a perception that some of these exponential things will be way out there. Hey, we're going to build space hotels and things, which would be very cool, but frankly, you know, we're not ready for that. A lot of these things are actually, you know, fairly mundane, but they make a lot of money. So an example, we worked with TD Ameritrade, which at the time was a $25 billion online brokerage in the US. And they came to us in 2017 and said, we've just heard about this startup called Robinhood, and they're going to offer free trades. And that's 60% of our revenue that might evaporate in months. What do we do? And so in that situation, looking at the underlying talents and resources of the company, we said, well, you're actually really good at data. What if you actually offered something that was a bit more like a Netflix or a Spotify kind of idea to your customers as a subscription that said, if you like these kinds of investments, you might like these other kinds of investments that people like you do. We worked with Procter Gamble that wanted to improve their invoicing. And instead of us saying, well, out of all the invoicing ideas that are out there, which is the best one, we actually said, well, why are you using the invoicing? And eventually someone said, it's obsolete, we don't need it. What we need is to put a 1 cent sensor in every box and a sensor reader in every warehouse. And if the box goes through that sensor, someone gets paid. So they got rid of $100 million worth of invoices every year. So, you know, you can bring companies along that sort of path and then get them comfortable to put those startups on the edge of the organization that are going to go into adjacent new industries.
Right, thank you. Imagine if all companies did that, it'd be amazing.
Yeah, we're trying.
Right, Morris, you're up next.
Yes, I've got one question, but before that, just to follow up to Michael's, the companies who are successful in doing this entrepreneurship internally, what sort of features do they have? Do they tend to actually have a little cell away from the day-to-day business that can tap into it, and obviously C-level support? Yeah, I'm just trying to understand what they are. But my other question was, in terms of VA and AR, the tech's been around for a while, and it's like a technology trying to find a home. You know, there's a couple of obvious areas in the training and in the medical side where, you know, there's some commercial realities. What areas do you see as being next along in that sort of space to find a commercial home?
Great. Okay. So let me talk about that one first and then come back to whether it should be on the edge of the organization. We worked with Boston Scientific, which is a big medical device company. And we were working in their Latin American division, and what they realized was a problem that they wanted to solve. Again, you know, focus on the problem first, is that a lot of rural doctors don't have time to come and be trained in a big city. It's too expensive. They need to be with their patients because there's so low access to medical care. And sending a video is not going to cut it. But what we did try was, what about VR and AR? And it turned out that there could actually be a better learning experience that way than actually coming to the city. And so they spent under $1 million building out virtual reality and offering it. And within a month of releasing it, they were getting 20 times as many people through the training at 5% of the cost. They were selling more of their heart stents, but they were also saving huge numbers of lives that wouldn't have been saved otherwise. And so, you know, we saw just a huge benefit of AR and VR that sort of way. And so, yeah, I've been disappointed by how AR and VR have, you know, you go along to the events and you see the same stuff that you saw 10 years ago. But I have a feeling it might break out into something a bit new.
You know, that's why I asked the question. I'm a little bit skeptical because, like I said, from a training perspective, I know there's mining companies that are using that for underground operators and as part of induction and all that sort of stuff, OH&S, etc. But in the consumer markets, you know, away from the medical space, there's been very little uptake.
Yeah, yeah, it's clunky. It's you know, until they actually get the hardware better, it's going to be an issue. Yeah. So back on the, should the corporate innovation group be separate or not? If you ask the founder of our company, he would say absolutely. For me, I say, I actually think that if you isolate a team, they will be isolated forever. They become those strange people who are doing something that's meant to be cool, and everyone will throw darts at it. And when they come back to the big company, everyone will say, that doesn't make sense for me. So I think it's really important to have ongoing communication. Also, if you say to a company, innovation happens over there, that is the worst thing that you can be saying to people. So I'm a big proponent of bringing cross-functional teams from across companies that come together for, well, we do 10-week sprints to create these ideas. Some of them will stay with that idea and implement it. Some of them will go back and take that thinking back into the company, and they'll become champions to innovation and change.
Yeah, no, because within the company, they're doing their day to day, but they need to set aside some time to actually sit down with the, if you like, the entrepreneurial team to say, this is the problem that I have, this is what you're working on, and have that interaction, grab all the data that resides and the relevant people that resides within the organisation, and actually do a better job.
Yes, co-design with them.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Carl, it's over to you.
Thanks. Two quick things. One, actually just wasn't the question I was planning, but building off the discussion with Maurice just a minute ago, I was in around, the culture that enables some of this. My day job, we've just been implementing, well, what was originally, I think, Spotify's squads and guilds sort of model, trying to bring cross-functional teams together for, for specific projects or specific products. I know that's had some challenges. Atlassian's been working a lot on that model and has sort of refined it into something that seems to be a little bit more robust in practice, but I'm not sure what your either experience or perspective on that model is, and kind of linking to what I was going to be asking, which is your attributes of ExOs are all, interestingly, like culture, internal culture wasn't anywhere on those. I mean, I guess it's perhaps implicit in a few of them, but those are,
yeah, they're enablers.
More a comment than a question, I'm afraid, but yeah, interested in your perspective.
Yeah, they're very much enablers to that, but if you actually have that massive transformative purpose that's guiding it, that has a huge impact on culture, and that 10x thinking certainly does as well. But I think the open-mindedness, we also, when we start with a client, we, instead of going straight into the project, we'll spend a whole week just getting the clients to imagine the future. And it's only when they actually get into that mindset and start thinking about how, these exponential technologies will be different in whatever time frame, and what is possible, that they can't unsee the fact that they actually have to change and do really interesting things, and then we can get into it. And during that time, they'll have developed a massive transformative purpose for the company, maybe the project as well, but also personally. And then they can actually link themselves back to why they're actually doing this. But we're actually seeing corporate culture change through these 10-week projects that is not being achieved in a lot of the HR projects, which is pretty cool, which is basically, if you tell people to go and innovate, they have no idea how to do it. If you give them a really good process and lead them through it and give them access to global thinkers, then they become really proficient at it, and they feel confident and enabled. So that works. I actually don't know much about the Atlassian process. I'm not sure that I can comment too much, but sorry.
Ask us in 3 months.
I'd love to hear about it. No.
Very good. So we're coming up to the hour, but there's still time if somebody has another question for Emilie. Yes, Peter.
Yes, good afternoon, Emilie. Thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to take the thinking back down to the startup level for a moment, and my, sort of working around a little bit of the startup land. one of the things you described is a group of people that probably know the customer very, very well, but don't necessarily know how to use the capability they've got to serve them in a 10x way, if that makes sense. Whereas in startup land, I think a lot of the time you've got people who are trying to think 10x or sometimes 100x, you know, maybe well beyond what the capability of themselves can support, or potentially the customer themselves actually wants or needs. And so I kind of feel like there's almost a different problem there in terms of the fact that a lot of startups don't necessarily understand the customer dynamic. I'm wondering if you maybe speak to that a little bit as well, and whether or not that sort of theming has come up in any of the work that you've done.
I think that's a really interesting point, and I actually think it's that both need the same answer. So I actually think that almost no one in large companies understands the customer. Most of the time when we actually go and talk to a customer, it will literally be the first time that everyone on the team has actually gone and spoken to a customer. Because usually only if you're a salesperson, or if you're in market testing, or maybe a CEO who's got, you know, one very large customer, do you get to talk with them. And so, you know, I think it's absolutely vital. And both groups, anyone who's trying to innovate needs to say, okay, well, is there a problem set that I want to go and solve, and then go and talk to customers and other stakeholders and co-design that with them. And if that's missing anywhere along the process, that validation, it will just die, and you'll have an idea that's way too big, way too small, or just you know, like the old waterfall methods where someone would spend, you know, companies would spend 5-10 years putting something together without actually realizing whether it will work in the market.
And do you see a lot in, because a lot of the things we see in startup land, of course, is people falling in love with the idea and maybe not being able to let it go when they need to. Are you seeing that in large companies as well?
Well, we always say fall in love with the problem, not with the solution. Yeah. We're not seeing it in large companies where we've done the sprints, because we drum into people the validation so much. But yeah, we see a lot of problems within large companies in that they they don't know how to innovate. So they'll throw things at the wall and see whether they'll work. So they might do a competition. Okay, anyone can tell us their innovation idea from across the organization, and we'll give them a $10,000 prize if they win, which often just backfires completely, because often the ideas have no relevance to the market, or they're, you know, someone's pet project that they've been trying to get, you know, they've had pushed back 10 times. And so usually you get a very poor quality pool of ideas. You know, none of them will be implemented, which, you know, is a real bait and switch to the people and gives a very bad impression. And then someone will get a prize for something that's not that great. And the true innovators in the company will go, but I'm working so hard, and this person spent half their Sunday on it and they got $10,000. Why? So we see a lot of that kind of stuff happening just because there isn't a process where they're saying, here's how you innovate and here's how you co-design with a customer.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And look, I have one question that I'd like to ask related to that, but I want to step outside the companies and look at the relationship between startups and corporates. So you do a lot of work with large organizations, and I want to focus on Australia for a moment. One of the things that a vibrant and effective innovation economy needs is that large organizations become customers for the small disruptive innovators. It's one of the safer ways that those companies can explore their own innovation potential. And of course, it's a way to feed those smaller companies and give them a chance to see whether or not the problem they think they're solving is a problem that they are really solving or needs to be solved, or if their solution is the right solution. And then consequentially from that, the next step, of course, is that the big companies buy the small companies when they've been proven. Those two steps have been a critical part in almost every economy that has really launched into an innovation success story. And we've seen it patchily with our banks on and off over the last 25 years. but really in Australia, it's not something we see commonly. Do you have a perspective as to why or how the corporate companies should or could be looking at that? And is it part of what you engage with during your sprints?
It is. Let me start with why it's been so tough first, and then what I think some of the solutions are. Working with a large company is really tough. They take months with legal stuff. They take, all this time to make decisions. They change their mind. They change their personnel so often that you think you've got there, and then you have to, start again with a whole new group of people. I often think that startups are better working with medium-sized companies before they actually go to the very large ones, because you can so easily get crushed. We also see a lot of, frankly, large companies buying or investing into small ones or buying them out simply to stop them because they actually see them as disruptors. Or to slow them down, or to, frankly, steal their ideas. So, being very careful and growing to a certain size is important. The other thing that we see is we're always trying to bring in small companies, but often what will happen, so for instance, we just brought in 2 fantastic data companies that could have done really great software. But the large companies also talked to Amazon Web Services that offered them a whole lot of free stuff. It's Amazon, it's cool, it's, and of course, the conversations just stopped immediately with the startups. So, it can be very tough. However, yes, if you can actually get with the people who are the innovation-minded groups, it might actually be those ones that are thinking a bit differently and that have worked out how to actually navigate their own corporate immune system and get things done, then it's really important. But we also need to educate the large companies of how to actually work nicely in the sandpit with smaller companies, or they're not going to have that access to really interesting ideas that they may not be able to develop themselves.
Great. So last chance, anybody who's got a burning question? If not, I'd like you to join with me in thanking Emilie for being with us today. I think it's been a very interesting talk. So thank you one and all for turning up.
Thank you so much. And thanks, Jordan, for the opportunity. It's wonderful to meet you all.
It's been a great
Thanks, Emilie.
Thank you, Emilie.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.